So in the case of the following entries you're going to find in this list, there's a strong chance viewers were just too busy recoiling at a gory or horrifying moment to question what they were watching on screen. Oh, and I'm Gareth, by the way, and this is What Culture Horror. Here are 10 bizarre horror movie moments you just accepted. Number 10, some quite bizarre raspberries, Marrowbone. Sergio G. Sanchez's 2017 picture, Marrowbone, focuses on the titular clan, whose mother dies after they move from England to Maine. The children left behind cover the mirrors and lock the attic to keep themselves safe from the ghost that haunts their home. Before the unexpected truth is revealed, however, something quite peculiar goes down pretty early on in the movie. Following the film's prologue and title flashing up on screen, young Sam is seen picking what appeared to be raspberries outside of the family home. Oh, lovely. However, if you really focus on these little red berries for a second, it becomes clear that this is anything but a legit raspberry bush. Raspberries typically grow in bunches that all hang off one stem, while these ones seem to have been individually stuck on the end of each separate stem so the kid could easily pluck them and just carry on with the scene. You can also see a strange lack of receptacle once it's picked too. Yeah, a bit weird. It was likely less fiddly than using a real raspberry bush, or perhaps was just the best the team behind the movie could come up with after realizing the location didn't possess the correct vegetation. Number 9, wouldn't Pat have bled out before the end of the movie? Green Room. Along with giving the world a brilliantly disturbing performance from the great Patrick Stewart, Jeremy Saulnier's Green Room also delivered a truly sickening moment of gore. As the Ain't Right band find themselves trapped inside the titular room within a neo-Nazi skinhead bar, they resort to holding one of the bouncers hostage. They then attempt to negotiate their way out of this intense situation, and things quickly escalate. When trying to hand a gun back to Darcy, the band soon realise they're being lured into a trap, with this leading to Pat having his arm ripped to shreds through a doorway. The wounds are clearly deep and his hand appears to be hanging onto the rest of his arm by a thread. In order to keep the movie and tension ticking along nicely though, Pat is ultimately patched up with gaffer tape and manages to power through until the very end of the picture. Here's the thing though, despite it being pretty easy to accept this DIY solution in the moment, it is likely that Pat would have actually bled out long before the film ended in real life. But in this stressful tale, sticky tape and a whole lot of adrenaline are seemingly enough to combat even the most fatal of injuries. Right then. Speaking of horrible injuries in films, what do you think is the most horrendous injury ever in a horror movie? Yeah, this is going to be fun. Let me know in the comments. Number 8, a crew member helps pull Grace Zabriskie away. Child's Play 2. When a character finds themselves being suddenly murdered by an evil doll, it can be quite easy to overlook something as noticeable as a helpful crew member in frame. The aforementioned killing went down during Child's Play 2, after Grace Poole is stabbed repeatedly by the possessed figure about an hour into the picture. You can definitely see someone helping her in the bottom right of the shot. Now, it's unclear whether they were there to catch her should she slip and fall back, or were even pulling her away from the weapon as the fake blood continued to flow. And it's one that you either clocked long ago and just accepted as part of this surreal moment of murder, or even assumed was simply a section of Poole's body or costume moving amidst the mayhem. Either way, it's impossible to ignore this strange grey-sleeved appearance once you catch it. Number 7, how did a shark know how to work an oven? Deep Blue Sea. During 1999's slice of shark horror known as Deep Blue Sea, LL Cool J plays Sherman Preacher Dudley, the cook within the underwater testing facility Aquatica. As Rennie Harlan's nightmare unfolds, Preacher ends up losing his bird to one of the genetically engineered, super intelligent fish trying to devour the crew. There's even a moment there when it looked like this chef was set to be cooked within his own oven by one of said sharks. After one of these sharks manages to switch the oven on, Preacher swiftly makes his way into the upper part of it as the predator smashes through the door below. He then escapes before exploding the monster thanks to a combination of his lighter and the gas unleashed by the cooker. But while it initially may not have seemed any odder than smart sharks swimming backwards, really think about it. How would a shark, even a ridiculously clever one, have known how to work the oven? Had they been watching Preacher making some dishes? Did they just instinctively know their way around a kitchen? Now sure, it may just have been a lucky nudge, but the scene is presented in a way that makes you feel like they're intentionally trying to roast a human alive here. Number 6, a lawnmower decapitation, Frankenhooker. If it wasn't clear from the title, the Frank Henenlotter-directed 1990 horror black comedy Frankenhooker is one surreal film. In the wake of his fiancée Elizabeth being shockingly killed in a freak lawnmower accident, scientist Jeffrey Franken brings her back to life by popping her head onto the body parts of prostitutes. As you do. It's a movie that certainly isn't lacking when it comes to outrageous and bizarre moments, with the aforementioned sex workers being blown up by supercrack and Franken then stealing their limbs being just one of the mad sequences. And perhaps it's the sheer amount of absurdity on show that resulted in most people just accepting the fact Elizabeth lost her head in the most perplexing way imaginable. You see, it's said that Elizabeth's noggin was detached from her body thanks to the remote-controlled mower accidentally shredding her to pieces at her dad's birthday. But how on earth would that work? The deadly tool appeared to be heading right for her shins in that scene, but somehow managed to do enough damage to detach her head and a number of other body parts from her torso? Something doesn't quite add up here. However, most folks were too busy trying to process the rest of this balmy cult classic to really linger on this weird detail. If you're enjoying this list today, my friend, then hit that subscribe button down below and you will get more frightening delights from What Culture Horror. Number 5, Keith heads right down to the basement, Barbarian. Now for a bizarre decision the viewer more than likely just accepted without much fuss, and one that led to the surprising end of horror star Bill Skarsgård in 2022's Barbarian. During the first chunk of Zach Cregger's disturbing film, viewers are introduced to Skarsgård's Keith and Georgina Campbell's Tess, with the two ultimately sharing a rental home for a night after it was double booked. But with Skarsgård being known for his creepy work within the genre, the viewer is obviously on edge throughout, feeling his seemingly normal character will show his true colours soon enough. Perhaps that's part of the reason why nobody really batted an eyelid when Keith weirdly insisted on going to check out the freaky room Tess had discovered underneath the house. You know, instead of just calling the cops like any sensible person would here. If Keith was the person behind all of this and it was a trap, it made sense that he'd want to lure Tess downstairs, right? But even if he wasn't, you could at least see where Keith was coming from, couldn't you? Keith's somewhat solid argument of a room and a bucket not sounding dangerous enough for him to panic wasn't that difficult to accept in the moment. The more you think about the terrifying consequences of that choice, though, Keith is viciously killed by the mother after going down below. It's clear Keith just did the stupidest and strangest thing possible here. Number 4, opening the door would change the room temperature, Alien Romulus. Fede Alvarez's Alien Romulus may be a largely enjoyable and chilling ride, but this chapter set between Ridley Scott's Alien and James Cameron's Aliens still boasts the odd weird moment. One that the viewer may not have fully realised during a first watch involved Rain, Andy and Tyler trying to make it through a hallway stuffed full of facehuggers. The trio decide that the only way they can get past the aliens is by raising the room's temperature to body temperature, due to the facehuggers using temperature to hunt down their victims, apparently. A decent enough plan, sure, but one that immediately should have unravelled when the team entered. Why? Well, because while the room would have gotten up to body temperature thanks to them tinkering with the settings, the second they opened the door, surely the room's temperature would have instantly started dropping, no? Meaning their cunning plan would have likely gone sideways quicker than it ultimately did, with most being too busy wiping away their own beads of sweat to really analyse whether this plan would have actually worked in real life. Number 3, why didn't Joel just look away? Smile. The first of Parker Finn's hit smile horrors ends on one hell of a startling note. After being tormented over the course of the film by a smiling entity, Rose Cotter looks to bring the curse to an end by dying alone. You see, to keep the entity alive, someone needs to witness the carrier taking their own life, with it then passing on to them. In the end though, Rose's plan doesn't really work out, with her ex-boyfriend Joel unfortunately witnessing her killing herself after being fully possessed by the entity during the movie's gripping final moments. It's such an effective and devastating end that few really bothered to question it. But if you dig a little deeper, Joel's decision to keep staring at Rose doesn't really make sense here. There's no denying that he'd be somewhat in shock seeing his ex set herself on fire. However, even with that in mind, Joel discovered with Rose exactly what would happen if he watched her take her own life, but still carried on looking anyway. Some have argued that the entity already had hold of him here, but that wasn't exactly clear in the picture itself. Instead, it felt like Joel ignored the most logical choice here, looking away, just to ensure there was room for an admittedly awesome sequel. Number 2, a leprechaun is resurrected through a private area. Leprechaun 4 in space. The Leprechaun series is certainly not a dull watch. A leprechaun rap, sudden eyeball removals, and pulling a pot of gold out of a belly are just a few of the surreal visuals brought to screens over the years. But a truly bizarre moment that has arguably been lost in the shuffle and just accepted as your typical occurrence in this series went down in the fourth installment, Leprechaun 4 in Space. In that 1997 sci-fi horror directed by Brian Trenchard Smith, Warwick Davis' titular menace is initially killed by a bunch of space marines. But when Private Kowalski decides to take the piss by, well, doing exactly that on the body of the dead leprechaun, said being's spirit travels up his urine and into his pee-pee. Sure enough, when Kowalski attempts to get it on with a fellow marine later, that seemingly deceased but now resurrected leprechaun then bursts out of the genitalia, killing the cocky soldier in the process. I make myself laugh. In any other franchise, a creature crawling out of a man's sensitive area would have been one of the most perplexing and ridiculous things ever to occur. But in the wacky world of Leprechaun, it made sense. And fans just accepted this as another day at the weird office. Number 1, Pazuzu in the Extractor fan, The Exorcist. The late great William Friedkin may be one of the finest minds ever to work within the horror genre, but it's safe to say that some of the additions he made to the all-time classic that is The Exorcist were a bit weird. Perhaps the most perplexing alteration made in his 2000 director's cut, which was developed primarily in response to the wishes of screenwriter and original Exorcist novelist William Peter Blatty, who had fallen out with Friedkin due to the removal of a key scene in the theatrical version, is the presence of extra subliminal appearances from Pazuzu, the demon that possesses Regan McNeil. Rather than just wisely dropping in the one spooky shot of its face, as seen in the theatrical cut, Friedkin got a little too trigger-happy, with the demon's face most infamously and bizarrely appearing behind Chris McNeil on the kitchen Extractor fan for a second. The little detail doesn't really add anything to a character's experience in the film. Chris doesn't even see it here. It just looks a bit silly, really. With this version you've never seen, now ironically being the one most people will have seen first though, viewers have largely just accepted this subliminal weirdness as part of the Exorcist furniture.